His eyes were fixed on the flight attendant, and he listened to her words about stowing the tray table and returning the seat to its original position, because soon they would be starting their descent procedure at Rio de Janeiro airport. However, his thoughts were far from there, and his heart was beating so hard in his chest that it felt like it was going to explode. But he tried to control himself, hoping that no one there would notice his joy, his euphoria, his fear. Because he was arriving in Rio, and after 2 years, finally, he was going to meet his beloved. 2 years talking to her on the computer, on the phone, the two of them making plans for the future together. And now, there was very little time left for him to meet her in person, to see her up close, for real, in front of him, in his arms. After that, it would be time to keep pursuing their dreams. It couldn't go wrong. Yeah, this even sounds like the beginning of a love story, doesn't it? But I assure you there's a problem there. This man's beloved was only 12 years old. I'm Marcos Campos, and every week here I present at least 3 criminal cases on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So go ahead and turn on your notifications, leave a like, a comment, even if it's just an emoji, and if you can, become a member because it really helps me a lot with the productions here. All right, get ready because today's case is one of those. Let's get to the facts. On the morning of March 6, 2023, a 12-year-old girl left her house just like she did every day to go to school. She left around 6:30 in the morning, wearing her uniform and carrying her backpack. The school was located near Barra de Guaratiba in the west zone of Rio de Janeiro. But that day, she never entered the school to attend classes. At lunchtime, when Alessandra didn't come home, her parents started to get worried. The first thing they did was try to call their daughter's cell phone, but the phone was either turned off or out of range. Then they called the school, and that's when they received information that made everything worse. Alessandra hadn't entered the school that morning, and that didn't make any sense. According to her parents, the girl was calm, responsible, had never run away from home, had never done anything like that. She had no history of problems like that. For example, with problems involving other people, she always followed the same routine. In other words, in the family's mind, there was no reason for her to simply disappear. But 2 pieces of information started to raise suspicions. First, inside the backpack, besides her school supplies, Alessandra had taken a pink dress and a new pair of shoes. Second, some people said they saw the girl talking to an unknown man at the school gate. From that moment on, for the family, it stopped being just a delay and became a police matter. O início da investigação. With the girl missing, the parents went to the missing persons police station in Rio de Janeiro and reported the case. From there, the first investigations began. The investigators talked to family members, schoolmates, and the people who had last seen Alessandra that morning. And in those first conversations, a very important piece of information came up. A few months earlier, the parents had discovered that their daughter had a strange online friendship with someone they didn't know. According to them, Alessandra was talking to a guy who said he lived in Minas Gerais, and the two had met on TikTok. When they found this out, the parents naturally became worried. They even took their daughter's phone away for a while to cut off this contact. At the time, the girl told some friends that this guy was her boyfriend. According to what she said, his name was Eduardo and he was about 16 years old. But her parents never trusted that story. In fact, they suspected that the profile was fake and that behind it there could actually be a much older adult man. Even so, after a few months, her parents ended up giving the phone back to their daughter. According to her father, Alessandra was very down during the period when she was without her phone. She then promised that she would no longer talk to that boy, and because of that, Her parents gave her a vote of confidence and decided to let her use the phone again. But now, with the girl missing, the investigators needed to consider all possibilities. That possibility too, obviously, because even at just 12 years old, understanding the victim's relationships, including the online ones, could be crucial to finding out what had actually happened. Meanwhile, new information began emerging. Some people who were near the school that morning said that Alessandra seemed calm while talking to the man who was in front of the school with her. In other words, everything indicated that she hadn't been taken by force, she simply got into a car with him and left. And at that moment, no one had the slightest idea of what was really happening. But the big question was, who was that man and where had he taken the girl? The message? As the hours went by, the family's desperation only grew. Friends and relatives started helping with the search, that standard protocol. Posters with Alessandra's photo were put up in several places around the area, and the case also started circulating on social media. The tip lines started receiving information, but many of them turned out to be false. There were even people saying they had seen the girl in different neighborhoods, in different communities, and each new piece of information gave her parents hope. But when they went to those places, it wasn't their daughter. In the middle of all this desperation, they even received prank calls. Yeah, guys, there really are people that bad. Some people sent messages saying that Alessandra had been abused and was in a certain hospital, but none of that was true. And the situation just got even stranger. The next day, the family received a message sent from Alessandra's own cell phone. Along with that message, there was also a photo of the girl inside a car. In that message, she said she was fine and that her parents should stay calm and not worry. But something immediately caught their attention. A cousin of the girl later commented that the message was written in a very proper way, with perfect punctuation and complete sentences. And according to this cousin, that didn't seem like Alessandra's natural way of writing. She didn't usually send messages like that. Besides that, in the photo, the girl's expression was described as sad to the investigators. So that raised an important red flag. It was possible that someone had dictated that message or coached her on what to say. After that, her cell phone was turned off again. The investigation moves forward then, and that's when another relevant piece of information comes up. A schoolmate said that Alessandra had mentioned she was thinking about traveling to Minas Gerais to meet her online boyfriend. That same person she used to talk to, she had met on TikTok. Now, for the investigators, it was starting to make some sense. The hypothesis that was gaining strength was that someone had deceived her and managed to convince her to leave with him. But the main question still needed to be answered. Who was this person? Who was the man? As the investigation progressed, the police began to analyze the girl's contacts on social media. It was necessary to trace the calls, digital footprints, message history, accounts used, and devices that had contact with the girl's cell phone. And, little by little, the investigators started putting the pieces of this puzzle together and reached a conclusion. The man who had taken Alessandra was not a 16-year-old teenager, he was an adult. His name was actually Eduardo da Silva Noronha, but he was 25 years old. Eduardo was originally from Paulo Ramos, a small town in the interior of Maranhão with about 20,000 inhabitants. And according to the investigation, the contact between the two hadn't started recently. In fact, he had already been with Alessandra for about 2 years, that is, since the girl was only 10 years old. During all this time, Eduardo had frequent conversations with her over the internet. According to the investigators, he gradually got closer, building trust, until he convinced the girl that the two of them were in a relationship. And there was one more worrying detail there on Alessandra's cell phone. There was a spy app, and this type of app allows another person to monitor messages, location, and various activities on the device. According to the police, That's how Eduardo was able to monitor the girl's routine. He knew when she left home, when she got back from school, and what times she was alone. With this information, he started planning the meeting. Eduardo worked, and for a while he was saving money. His plan was to travel to Rio de Janeiro, meet the girl, and take her with him to São Luís, the capital of Maranhão. And that's exactly what happened. On the morning when Alessandra disappeared, Eduardo was already in Rio de Janeiro. He had flown there from Maranhão. I believe everyone remembers the opening of the episode. Isn't that where I talked about a man who was distressed, anxious, trying to hide his emotions while the plane was landing? Well, after he landed, he went to the girl's school and met her. From that moment on, the two of them started a journey of more than 3,000 kilometers across the country. But there was a problem with that, a big problem, I would say. Alessandra was only 12 years old. She didn't have her documents with her, and because of that, she couldn't board a plane or a bus. So, Eduardo had to improvise to find another way to get back to Maranhão. And the solution he found was something maybe unusual that even surprised the investigators. The trip, any of the more common transportation options, let's say, would require, as we've seen, an official ID for the girl. So, Eduardo had to find another way to set off, to leave Rio de Janeiro. With her, Eduardo booked a ride share to make this long trip. The route between Rio de Janeiro and São Luís do Maranhão is about 3,100 kilometers long. Depending on the road conditions, it's a 2 to 3 day trip. According to Eduardo himself, as he later said, the ride had been scheduled about a week earlier, and the amount paid for that trip, according to reports, was agreed to be around 4,000 reais. But it's not clear whether this ride was arranged directly with the driver or if it happened through the app itself. What is known is that the three of them spent entire days inside the car. The driver, Eduardo, and the 12-year-old girl who had just given up. Parecer do Rio de Janeiro. During this period, while they were crossing several states by road, Alessandra's family remained in despair, anxious, not knowing what was happening or where she was. The only concrete clue was that strange message that had been sent from her cell phone. Meanwhile, the investigators kept trying to track the digital activity involved in the case until, a few days later, something finally came up. A clear lead emerged. The data gathered by the investigation indicated that the girl could really be in Maranhão. Given that, the Rio de Janeiro police got in touch with the civil police in São Luís, Maranhão. And from that moment on, a joint operation began to locate Alessandra. Because now, the investigators believed they knew exactly where to find her. Working together now, the investigators from both states managed to locate an address, and of course, they went there. After some investigations, the police arrived at a property in the Vinea neighborhood in São Luís. There was a small studio apartment rented by Eduardo. On March 14, 2023, 8 days after Alessandra disappeared, the police went to the location to check the situation. When they arrived, they tried to make contact at the door. While the officers were there trying to figure out if there was anyone inside that house, a girl appeared at the window. That's right, it was Alessandra. At that moment, the police officers were sure they had found the victim they had been looking for more than a week. According to Detective Marconi Matos, who is in charge of the case, the girl was being kept inside that studio apartment and was not allowed to leave on her own. The situation was classified as kidnapping and false imprisonment. Alessandra was immediately removed from the location and taken to receive care. She was placed under the care of the Child Protection Council at the Casa da Mulher Brasileira in São Luís, a support center for victims of violence. Meanwhile, back in Rio de Janeiro, her parents received the news they had been desperately awaiting for days. Their daughter had been found. She was safe, alive. The relief was enormous. Now the challenge was different. They needed to travel to Maranhão to get the girl. Since Alessandra didn't have any documents, her parents would have to go there in person to bring her back home. In other words, besides the trip there, they would be forced to buy 3 tickets for the return, an unexpected expense. But at that moment, none of that mattered, right? What really mattered was that their daughter had been found and would soon be back home with the family. And meanwhile, Eduardo was arrested, and from then on, the case went to court. After the arrest, Eduardo da Silva Noronha was charged with the crimes of kidnapping and rape of a vulnerable person, even though at that moment there was still no evidence that any sexual contact had actually occurred. Until then, he had no criminal record. But right after the custody hearing, the court made a decision that sparked a lot of reaction. Eduardo was allowed to remain free while facing the charges, only having to wear an electronic ankle monitor. The decision took into consideration, among other things, the testimony of Alessandra herself. According to what was reported, the girl said that she had traveled with him of her own free will, and, in the version presented by Eduardo, the story would be different from what the investigation indicated. He stated that the two of them were in a relationship and that the plan was to start a real relationship when she turned 18. According to him, the trip happened because Alessandra was having problems at home and wanted to leave. Eduardo also said that he intended to let her family know that everything was fine as soon as things calmed down. In fact, according to him, it was Alessandra herself who sent the messages to her parents during the trip. In his account, both of them were regretful and the girl would be returning home soon. But, based on his version, while all of this was happening and going through their minds, the police arrived and caught them in the act. Meanwhile, the legal process continued. Then, through the courts, new updates emerged. The first stage of the trial took place on October 29, 2025 at the 8th Criminal Court specialized in crimes against children and adolescents in San Luis. Because it involved a minor victim, the case began to proceed under seal. And so, we have a gap in what is actually public about this story. It was also reported that Eduardo even moved to Pará and that, at a certain point, he was no longer wearing an electronic ankle monitor. Even so, among the measures imposed by the court was a ban on leaving the country and on having any contact with Alessandra. His defense claims that they intend to seek acquittal of the charges, arguing that no sexual abuse occurred. In the end, what this case shows is something that, unfortunately, is becoming more and more common. It's not an adult pretending to be a teenager talking to a child online for 2 years. He gradually gains her trust and starts influencing her decisions until he convinces this girl to cross the entire country to live with him. And look, I wanted to know your opinion about a certain thing. Nowadays, it's very common to see children and teenagers spending hours isolated inside their rooms, isn't it? In their own rooms, using their cell phones there. In your opinion, to what extent can parents really know what their children are doing on the internet, who they're talking to? Because think about it with me, I don't know, for an older guy, an adult with bad intentions, with that kind of twisted mindset, it seems like a task as easy as taking candy from a child. Brainwashing a little kid between 10 and 12 years old, isn't that really dangerous? Now I'm waiting for the outcome of this story. Since it's under seal, right? We don't know the details after this discovery, after the girl returned home. We don't know if the investigation found out, through any report or examination, whether there was any element that could make the crime more serious or add aggravating factors. Right now, that's what we know. And I decided to bring this story here for you because it sounds like a tale. It's so absurd, but it shows exactly what I just mentioned. For someone with bad intentions, it's very easy to influence the mind of a 10 or 12-year-old to the point where they betray their parents' trust, just so they don't betray the trust of the one who, in their little mind, seems cooler, more of a friend, someone who understands their wishes. And look, I can say this because I have 2 daughters. One of them is actually 12. So I noticed this, Sometimes parents are just the annoying guys, who can't understand anything their kids want, who always ruin the fun, and so on and so forth. Man, it's a complicated phase, but you have to be constantly vigilant. One time I heard someone say something really important about having a relationship with your child. I think this applies to all of us, to all of you as well, who are responsible for children and teenagers. They don't need to love us right now. It's us who need to love them. Love them enough to set boundaries, even if it seems to them that we don't love them. That's it. Thank you so much for being here. Leave your thoughts on this case here. A kiss to Ruivo, and see you in the next episode.